And I know that a lot of those albums sold, and I also know that I heard Tony Rice on stage one time say, Bluegrass Album Band, I don't get that name. I mean, what the hell is it? Is it an album, a band? It's Bluegrass Album Band. What the hell does it mean? But it was successful enough that they kept doing it. I gotta say that the one time I saw the band perform, they're all so good that it's sort of like watching NBA basketball. They were so good that your ears kind of hurt, and they kind of phoned it in because they can. And I was never a fan of those albums.
The Rounders think that they took some of these players who'd been doing more progressive things and put them back in a more traditional context. Was there any sense that that was true? Oh, Tony's playing bluegrass again after these excursions with, more avant-garde stuff.
Well, yeah, but so what? I mean, they may think that they did that, and I guess they did do that, but it's not like the people on the album. I know Vassar Clements is on some of the later ones. It's not like those guys started playing, differently, less adventurous licks and stuff. They were just playing different songs. I mean, I just think it's the appeal that those records have is that it's the top guys playing the really traditional stuff, and it is good to have examples of that, I guess. I don't even know how many. And I used to get them free, and I don't know how many of them I still have. Yeah, and I don't. Some people probably think that they're extremely important. I never did. Maybe I should rethink that. Maybe I should go back and listen to them again. But it's odd to think of that. To some extent, I think I must have just thought, well, they need product in the pipeline, so let's. I don't think I gave it much thought beyond that. I did go see the band at the Great American Music Hall after the first one. I thought this is going to be great, and I was really disappointed. It was professional, certainly, technically proficient, but it really didn't. It lacked passion.
What about the JMB, which is another thing that usually gets a lot of reaction? I know you're not wild about the singing, but what about the impact of that album? Again, it's about the same time as the first Bluegrass album, man. They both came out, actually, looking at this, they both came out, I just lost it, 1981. They both came out in 1981.
Yeah, I remember thinking that they were hokey because they wore uniforms on stage. They looked kind of dumb. Of course, I was in California where people had quit wearing uniforms at about that time. And it was a conscious effort to return to older styles, the repertoire and approach of the older stuff. And the band was widely touted as being the saviors of the traditional sound. And I remember there was an article in the Washington Post to that, with that theme, and I remember Pete Wernick, who was in Hot Rise at the time, wrote a really nasty letter and objected, and certainly where I was, I got to listen to Vern Williams all the time, of whom we should speak at some point. I thought, these guys are okay. Really good band. Technically very proficient. I'm very happy that people out there had somebody like that to listen to, but I didn't feel any dearth of traditional pickers at that time where I was.
Oh, interesting. Okay. First of all, what were the elements that were supposedly a harkening back to the traditional sound?
Well, the approach,
which we're familiar. Go ahead. What was
the approach, beginning with the uniforms and the stupid cowboy hats. The repertoire was really diverse, but very carefully picked from the best of traditional bluegrass, and Eddie Stubbs, the fiddle player, had a real knowledge of honky-tonk music, which always had its element. Even Monroe covered a lot of like Ernest Tubb, Hank Williams type songs, and Eddie could really play that stuff. The three-part harmonies were gorgeous. I have to admit, I think Dudley's a better harmony singer than he was a lead singer. He had a style that may have appealed to people who, for instance, I mean, his style is antithetical, or is the antidote to the Del McCurry style, which in my mind is the purer lead style, in that it sounded more folky, and especially on the early albums, his over-dependence on vibrato, to me, bordered on parody. It was kind of ludicrous. I don't know if you want to print this, but as I said, Laurie Lewis says, well, yeah, he sings like a billy goat. And I think they're friends now, so
I'll
use that quote advisedly.
I won't use it from you.
I'll use it from
Okay.
Lori if she wants me to.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they did make great records, and their picking was exemplary. Well, we were riding, were we in the car? Anyway, Chris and I, my girlfriend, who's a mandolin player, and I were listening to one of the old Johnson Mountain Boys albums the other day, and she said, "Listen to that. That's Bill's Break." What's his first name? McLaughlin. It was the
Is it
original.
Richard?
Oh no, it's not Richard. I know. Anyway, purely traditional picker, and I mean, a lot of people do this. They play Monroe's breaks note for note, or they play their style and that's why people liked them. They thought, I guess people in the Southeast went, oh no, it's seldom seen in Shim Shim Cherie, and all of that stuff has gone by the wayside. But Johnson Mountain Boys they're a good band. I don't own all their records. And that would have been very easy for me to do. I like Longview a lot better. I mean, I think Dudley's the fourth best singer in that band. But that's personal taste. I just think, vibrato doesn't really, you don't need it in bluegrass. Although Joe Val had quite a wobbly vibrato too. Who knows?
You said you were living in Berkeley, California at the time. And you
Mhm.
said you felt no dearth of tradition. Let me take a break before. Yeah, you were going to tell me about the
Vernon Williams band.
Vernon Williams and the plentitude of traditional bluegrass in California and just on the scene in general, beyond the JMB.
Yeah, when I moved to Berkeley in 1976, that was, shortly, as I said, after I started listening to bluegrass, again, a lot, and buying bluegrass records, largely because of J.D. Crowe and the New South. I was amazed to discover that. I remember going to a California Bluegrass Association event in Finnish Hall on 10th Street in Berkeley. First time I ever saw the Good Old Persons, which at that time consisted of Paul Shalansky, Laurie Lewis, Kathy Kallick, Sally Van Meter, a great flat picker named Dorothy Baxter. I remember being blown away by that band, several others there. There's a band out there that's been together, oh God, since the late 60s, early 70s, called High Country, led by Butch Waller, who's a Monroe disciple in the extreme. I mean, he plays Monroe-style mandolin as well as anybody in the country. Very traditional. Never traveled much, not well known generally. He's written a couple songs that if not standards, at least are known in the circuit. There's a band called Phantoms of the Opry, which I kept hearing about, through which a lot of people, it was one of those bands that was like a training course for a lot of future bluegrass people. Pat Enright is the best known and most famous lead singer in the Nashville Bluegrass Band now. I think he'd settled there for a while after he got out of the Navy. Great lead vocalist.
Settled in the Bay Area.
In the Bay Area for a short while.
Now, do these bands you're referring to, these Bay Area bands, record? Were they out?
Some of them did.
Uh-huh.
High Country has a lot of albums. They had 2 major label releases on the Raccoon subsidiary of Warner Brothers. The Raccoon imprint was Jesse Colin Young's imprint, who lived in San Rafael, I think. And besides Butch, the really important player in that band was Ed Neff, who's one of the greatest traditional fiddle players in the country, largely unknown because he doesn't travel. His eyesight's really bad, and his wife has to drive him everywhere he goes. But he later played with Vern Williams. There's also a band called Done Gone that included another great, innovative mandolin player who's never done it full time, called Tom Beckany. Laurie Lewis eventually split from the Good Old Persons and started, it was first called the Grant Street String Band. Beckany was in that band too. John Reichman subsequently became a member of the Good Old Persons. He's one of the best mandolin players in the country. Progressive. He was in Tony Rice's progressive sort of jazzy band at one point. The band that everybody worshipped was the Vern Williams Band, or earlier even Vernon Ray, Vern Williams and Ray Park, these 2 guys from Arkansas. Vern, mandolin player, lead singer, with just an almost ear-shattering voice, no subtlety. And Ray was a great singer too, and they played the traditional repertoire. Everybody really loved them. Vern Williams Band made 1 record for Rounder.
Bluegrass from the Gold Coast or Gold Country.
And the band at that point, I believe, was Vern Williams, his son Delbert. Keith Little was a banjo player who later went on to play with the Country Gentlemen, and Ricky Skaggs, who lives in Nashville now, and Ed Neff. And the 3 and 4 part harmonies in that band on that record are just amazing. But that record was made on a shoestring budget, and is probably the best representation of that band we're ever going to have.
Well, I'm thinking that Vern Williams Band album was released 1 month before the first JMB album. And JMB went on to make many albums for Rounder and become this recognized icon of return to traditionalism that you're suggesting wasn't as real as it's made out to be. Vern Williams didn't make any more records for Rounder, at least.
And for a number of reasons, at that point, music was not a vocation for Vern. He worked at a job which required it, or he got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, so he went to bed at 8 o'clock during the week.
Yeah.
And Ed Neff, I've just described the reasons why it would have been tough for him to tour.
Yeah.
Plus, he was a chain smoker and he drove a lot of people nuts. They weren't showbiz. They were not showbiz ever in the way that, Vernon Ray had actually come to Nashville in the 60s with Herb Peterson. Herb Peterson was an early member of the Vernon Ray Band. There are endless, I could name so many people who saw the Vernon Ray and the scales dropped from their eyes. Gene LeBay, who's from Southern California and plays bass in the Nashville Bluegrass Band, had a one night gig with him. They said, Vernon Ray are here, they need a bass player, and he said, what's a Vernon Ray? Or he thought Vernon Ray was one guy. Yeah, and they're just remarkable, as good as anybody in the country at the traditional stuff. I think Vern's a bad experience in Nashville in the 60s had soured him on the business. They're both very salty, very thorny, cantankerous, and didn't like each other very much. So those are all the reasons why they couldn't be the Johnson Mountain Boys, and among many others. The void between the distance between California bluegrass and say the Washington D.C. area or the Boston area or the Southeast is 2,000 to 3,000 miles geographically, but light years just in terms of understanding. If there'd been a West Coast label at that point, like Rounder, to record those bands, the history of bluegrass, I think, would be a lot different. The Good Old Persons in their prime were on Kaleidoscope Records, which wasn't a big enough label to afford them. They were one of the really important progressive bluegrass bands. Spawned Sally Van Meter, who's recognized certainly now as one of the real great dobro players, and Kathy Kallick, great songwriter, and so forth. That band has never received its due because they weren't on a label like Rounder.
Are you suggesting to me a minute ago that Rounder just didn't know the California scene that well, just didn't get out there maybe? And...
Oh yeah, well I'm happy to assert that, and that's not their fault. I mean, Tony Rice lived in California.
Right.
Actually grew up in Southern California in large part, but he moved back and forth, and so Grisman was from New Jersey, I'm sure that originally, but yeah, he lived in Marin County. I forgot to mention Grisman. I forgot to mention Mike Marshall, Darrell Anger,
right.
All these exponents of the new acoustic music. They were all there at the same time in 1976 when I moved there. I remember in December of 76, these friends of mine bought me tickets to a show, a Bread and Roses benefit, and the headliner was Bonnie Raitt, and Maria Moldau was on the bill, and the David Grisman Quintet opened the show. And I knew Tony from bluegrass. I knew Grisman a little bit, I think, from Midnight at the Oasis. But that band stole the show. That was the F5 band. And for better or for worse, for whatever reason, that became the seminal acoustic music band, dog music, etc., etc. Yeah, all those people were around walking the streets and playing at Paul's Saloon, which was this tavern in San Francisco that featured bluegrass every night. Good Old Persons played there every Thursday night for 10 years, I think, or one night a week for 10 years. I'm not sure it was Thursday or whatever. There was a scene in Southern California as well, which I'm not as familiar with. Not too many records came from that scene. That was earlier. The Kentucky Colonels, the Dillards, all came from that scene down there. The Hillmen. Bluegrass Cardinals were the big band down there.
Yeah, which Rounder did do some.
That's right. They did. That was a long time. Yeah, that's right.
It seems, and I hadn't thought about it before at all, and I wouldn't, but it seems like from Northern California, Rounder seems to have latched on to what became the new acoustic movement players, but didn't latch on to the whole traditional scene.
Yeah.
I don't know why that's so. Maybe.
I'm not, perhaps, subconsciously preconceptions about
Where
traditional music is from, but I gotta say, and I expect this came from Ken, he recognized Joe Bow in Boston, and he recognized Vern Williams in the foothills of the Sierras. And Ken has tried to do records with Vern and Ray, and they haven't worked out for whatever reasons over the years. I know I used to. It was hell trying to book Vern for one date at the Freight, a year. Because, if he called at 8:01, he was in bed and his wife wouldn't wake him up, et cetera, et cetera.
Who were the Dry Branch Fire Squad?
Dry Branch Fire Squad. They're the brainchild of, God, what is that guy's name? You may want to turn off the tape for
We talk about Alison Krauss, who's become one of the hottest bluegrass crossovers of the 90s.
Yeah, and I've been the beneficiary of her good fortune as well as the Rounders and pretty much everybody to some extent in the business. Although it's funny, everybody seems to think that they can figure out from something Allison has done how they can translate something they do into a similar kind of success, and that hasn't proven to be the case. As is often the case with somebody who's just an enormous commercial success from a perspective, from a musical field that's kind of out of left field. It's inexplicable to some extent. I mean, she's immensely talented. The first time I heard of Allison, Chris Strachwitz came back from Rhode Island. They had this Cajun and Bluegrass Festival out there, and apparently the Del McCurry band who was appearing there didn't have a fiddle player, and she sat in and played fiddle with him all weekend, and he was raving about her.
Mm-hmm.
But when her first records came out, he hated them, and he's hated each succeeding album more vengefully because it's not traditional in his mind. She really downplays.
Are you talking about Del McCurdy?
I'm talking about Alison Krauss.
No, she's the player. Whose opinions are you?
Chris Strachwitz.
Chris Strachwitz, okay.
who, I mean, unmistakably, she's a wonderful fiddle player, and she cut her traditional chops in fiddle contests, which really tend to develop your skills. And if you can win those fiddle contests, and she was winning them quite early on. I think she signed with Rounder when she was 14. Actually, she's, I think, probably the first woman star in bluegrass, and is that, I mean, a star on a national level, to the extent that there have been national stars. They've all been men. They've all been in all-male ensembles. There aren't that many. You probably count them on one hand. If you stretch your definition some, starting with Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys and Flat and Scruggs, who were truly country music stars at a time when bluegrass was just part of country music. Say the Seldom Seen, the Country Gentleman, a few others. She's the first woman. Bluegrass is tough for a woman to sing in the normal keys, the normal pitch, and the rules are pretty rigid. Allison's never paid that much attention to rules, and that's always stood her in good stead. Her voice was appealing to a wide variety of people. I remember just when she was still in her teens, people doing her songs. They've sort of become bluegrass standards, and they brought a different sound into bluegrass.
What's that? Articulate that difference. No, it's our thing to do.
She doesn't sing at the top of her range, although she can. Her repertoire is liable to come from anywhere. She's a kid who grew up in the 70s, and so she does rock and roll songs. Her favorite band is Aerosmith, or it used to be. She liked to talk about video games, and she could play the old stuff to a fairly well. Always could, always will be able to. She apparently has made all the major life decisions since she was a kid, and she's made a lot of right decisions. She's resisted becoming major label. She's resisted making albums with electric instruments. A lot of traditionalists decry what she's done to the music. There are a lot more people that would like to figure out how she did it and do it themselves. She's a wonder. She truly is. And certainly around her, whomever deserves a lot of credit for hearing whatever it was they heard. Because as I understand it, she just sent them a tape.
That's what Ken told me, and he said all he cared about was the voice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why he pursued it, and after he met her, that's still what interested him.
Well, she's a good singer. I don't care for her voice. And I work for her. I mean, she's worked for me in the past too when I used to book the freight, but she's a consummate musician. You know, she really produces the albums, and she has a good ear. She discovered the Cox family. She's produced a lot of other people's albums. Her success to me is not inexplicable. It was certainly surprising. It came from left field. Nobody really understood it at the time, and you know, when the point that she's selling 3 million albums, it's, you know, that's pretty impressive, and I'd have to say she's probably in the history of bluegrass one of the 4 or 5 most important figures. There's no denying it.
You talk about her situation as being a woman. One of the things that Ken thinks is significant is that Rounder's done a lot of more than anybody, a lot of women bluegrass, not stars necessarily, but band leaders or featured artists, and Monteclair Lynch and Lynn Morris and
Lori Lewis.
She's recorded elsewhere, but the Stevens sisters, who you hate, I don't know, there may be some others. What's your take on that? I mean, I guess they do have
It's true.
more women than other people in featured roles or the band
It's
leaders.
true. Well, just think of where they're headquartered.
Go ahead, what do you mean?
The Northeast in a traditional, you know, politically traditional bailiwick. The Southeast is conservative, not just politically, but as far as role definitions, gender definitions, and so on and so forth. And women played bass and wore the gingham dress and pigtails. That was their role.
The Northeast is.
The Northeast is just a more progressive place, and if our Hooley Records had been a label that was interested in bluegrass, the same thing may have happened there. To some extent, it did with Kaleidoscope, which is the only other really important label that put out a lot of bluegrass, and they did the Good Old Persons, which started as an all-woman band, and there are lots of all-women bands in California. The ones in the Southeast tend to be sort of novelty bands like Petticoat Junction. They wear cute little outfits and stuff, and they don't really focus on their picking. I'm sure people are cursing the day they turned down the Dixie Chicks now when it was a bluegrass outfit, which is another interesting development. But I think basically just the political climate and the political persuasion of the Rounders, and maybe the fact that one of the owners is a woman. I don't think Marion's particularly a bluegrass aficionado, but she certainly isn't gonna turn down a good bluegrass band because it's fronted by a woman.
No, you're talking about a label where Marion was given the designation as president of the corporation when they just had to assign roles because they thought it was
Sure.
cool to have a woman president and right to have a woman president.
Sure.
So-
Well, and it's obviously they make a lot of decisions on the basis of their political bent, and people that know what their political bent is, and I got to tell you, it's not that way in the Southeast. I think with Sugar Hill, probably Barry would be and is as open as Rounder, but he got started later, and probably didn't have the opportunity to do the things that Rounder had done. I'm sure that a lot of the younger players go to Rounder because they're politically simpatico. The same way that I'm sure a lot of the older southeastern guys stay with a rebel for their whole lives because they feel more comfortable with those people. I got to tell you, Red Allen bragged about bringing Jews into bluegrass. For instance, there's a real, not just anti-Semitic bias, but anti-Yankee bias, anti-Catholic bias among the people who live and work in bluegrass in the Southeast. I'm one of those people now, but and I don't count myself as one of the conservative element, but it's there. It's there at every turn, and it's. I remember Bobby Osborne told Larry Stevenson. Larry Stevenson hired this woman to play banjo who was a national banjo champ at Winfield, Kansas. And Bobby said, "Are you nuts hiring a single woman to go on the road with you in a bluegrass band?" This was 3 years ago. Lynn Morris has said that she lost out on job after job. She was a two-time national champ, applying for jobs in all-male bluegrass bands, and eventually started her own band as leader, solely because she was a woman. Couldn't be because she didn't have the chops or she didn't travel well or whatever. So I think that can pretty much explains that. There are an awful lot of women acts out there now that want to be the next Alison Krauss instead of being the first whoever they are.
Mm-hmm.
Tina Adair on Sugar Hill's one that comes to mind. She apes Allison almost note for note as best as she can. What can I say? But I mean, Rounder has a long history of that, starting with, well, Hazel, I guess, is probably the best early example. It's politics.
Right. Another act that Ken I know loves, he put out 5 albums by Charles and Robert Woodstein. Were you familiar with those records at all, or their impact, or where they come from?
Yeah, I booked those guys at the Freight early on at Ken's behest, but also because I love that old repertoire. Nobody else was doing it. A lot of people in California just said, well, they sound so much like the Louvin Brothers that, what's the point? And you can make that
Well, there were no
criticism.
Louvin brothers to put on your stage, for one thing.
That's
part of the
absolutely
point.
right. That's absolutely right, and that was the argument that I made. But, and I remember Laurie saying, for instance, there's none of that fire or passion that's in the Louvin Brothers. It's a very difficult thing to ape somebody as sedulously as they did that. I can understand why Ken likes them. You have to understand that I saw the Louvin Brothers when I was 10 years old on stage, and the band didn't strike me quite the way that it struck Ken, although I certainly, I
The
love,
Woodsteins
yeah,
didn't strike you,
yeah. I love their albums and loved them live, but when I sit down to listen to that stuff, I probably got 15 Louvin Brothers albums. That's what I listen to.
Well, the translation of new repertoire, I mean, Ken consciously brought new songs to them that would not be Louvin Brothers repertoire, and the thing that shows up on a few albums, he's always got a Simon and Garfunkel song on.
So they do Sound of Silence, they do Bridge, something else, I think. Does that work for you, or anyone?
Not for me, not any more than it did when Buck Owens did Bridge Over Troubled Waters, But I mean, whether or not a song works, is a funny thing. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I do know that they do this one song called Rose of My Heart that's sort of become a standard, and I'm sure because of that recording, because I never heard it anywhere else. It's one of Ken's enthusiasms that I don't share as. Of course, if you say you want to preserve the old styles, then the Whitsteins are obviously going to be important because who does it better? But they don't really bring anything new to it. I mean, even the new songs they sing like the Louvin Brothers, or to a lesser extent the Delmore Brothers. My favorite band that can produce like that or brought to the Rounder is Bill Grant and Delia Bell, and I think it's tragic that they don't tour more than they do.
You know why that's it?
They don't make enough money.
Okay.
They never, and they've said that to me. They don't make enough money to make it worth their while. They never broke through the way that everybody thought they would. And I personally think that one of the problems is the Johnson Mountain Boys for a time were sort of the house band for Rounder, for bluegrass people. They're on every Bill and Delia record on Rounder. And then Bill and Delia would go out with a really inferior pickup band, including a deaf bass player. But when they came to California, the guy was deaf. He booked the California dates because he used to live in San Diego or something. He played bass with one finger. It was terrible. And people came expecting to hear this polished band, and it wasn't there. It wasn't there, and I think they got a lot of gigs on the basis of the Rounder albums and the Johnson Mountain. I think the Johnson Mountain Boys backing was a mistake, frankly. If the long view was for them to have a touring career, it hurt them because people weren't getting one. But Delia Bell is a woman who's sort of raw and varnished singing style. Was a sound that had gone away, that didn't exist. I've told people more than once that if, in a just world, Delia Bell would be the female vocalist of the year and Ralph Stanley would be the male vocalist every year, but that's not the way it works. She had a major label deal. Emmylou Harris liked her so much that she produced a record on Warner Brothers. They had an option for 7 albums. They pressed the thing up. There's a great duet with her and John Anderson, who's a major country star at the time, of a George Jones song. And leadership changed at the top. The album got buried. The options were dropped, and they're basically back at home playing locally in Hugo, Oklahoma. Ken did a great job digging up songs for them.
Do you know where he found them? Was it through?
They had she had one record, a solo record on County. They had a couple releases on Rebel. Prior to that, they'd only recorded on the Kiamachi Mountain label or whatever. She's a probably early middle-age woman at that point, her early 40s. So, and she doesn't like to sing lead. She likes to sing harmony, so she only never sang the leads, or very seldom in their shows. He's a good musician, not a great one. But he's the one with the ambition and the business savvy. He still puts on a bluegrass show every year. She may have been better served to go out on her own. I don't know. But I don't think there was ever any question of that happened, especially after the sort of debacle of the Emmylou thing. Classic record, if you can find it, grab it.
Other duets in the same time frame roughly were the Jody and Kate records.
That is a different thing entirely. Kate's great talent is the depth of emotion that she brings to a lyric. She serves the message of the song probably better than any singer I've ever heard. She doesn't have a strong voice, but it's very affecting. Doesn't have great range, and she's one of the best harmony singers in it. She blends, she's famous in Northern California for being a great harmony singer, because she blends well with just about anybody. Jody's a great musician, consummate. Again, one of the few old-time revival musicians that I have any interest in listening to, because he does it the way that the old-timers did, although he grew up in Brooklyn, I think.
Right.
New York, anyway.
Yeah. And you had some, you were there at the start when they did their first record for Rounder, right? You knew these guys and talked to Ken about them. Is that true?
Yeah, they had pitched this project, and they knew that I knew Ken.
And you're referring to what became their first duet
Their first, yeah, Kate and Jody album on Rounder. But I don't think I really had anything to do with it. I think the fact that Hazel Dickens got a hold of the tape and listened to it constantly made it possible for the album. Because certainly if there's anybody whose opinion Ken defers to, it's Hazel. And she knew, and she, she's a big fan of theirs. And that's why that album their Rounder albums are just tremendous as far as I'm concerned. They're adventurous, they're tasteful, they're wide-ranging, and they're done on a shoestring, because Rounder doesn't give people a lot of money to make those kinds of records.
Everybody likes those records, and most people, I've heard some negative remarks but about sort of a blandness, but most people seem to like the Whitstein records, or say they do. But that stuff doesn't, nobody seems to make any money off of it.
You can bet that probably most of the people that subscribe to the Old Time Herald own the Kate and Jody records. I don't know who else does.
Right.
Who else would?
They've each got about, Delia and Bill got about 2 or 3 Rounder albums. Kate and Jody got 4 or 5. Whitstein's got 5. And then it seems to, the
Well,
string
yeah,
runs out.
I mean, it's
And that's a lot of records maybe for each of them.
it's well, it is, and in the larger sense, I guess you'd have to say that that Rounder's important in the sense that future generations will be able to hear that stuff, and they might not have been able to otherwise.
Well, you booked the freight for a half dozen or more years. Could you, how much of that stuff could you bring in and sell tickets for at a club that was well known and in a kind of diverse urban area?
Good question. I think it was a developing thing at the time that I was there. I think that acts like that were doing better all the time. But I think the development moves at a very slow pace, probably doesn't keep up with inflation, in one way of looking at it. A good crowd for either one of those acts would be, a really good crowd would be 150 people.
For Kate and Jody or
Kate and Jody, well, yeah, the one time the Whitsteins played there, they only had about 80 paid, but they were playing at Grass Valley that same weekend. That's the only way that they could afford to play a place like the Freight, is to have and it's a double-edged sword. If they play at Grass Valley, a lot of people that would normally come to the Freight to see them won't, because they're going to the festival. It's a continuing battle to keep, and in the case of Kate and Jody, they're certainly not full-time touring musicians. Kate has a day job, always has. Only because Jody leads such a Spartan lifestyle has his music been able to support him. It wouldn't support a person with normal consumer needs in the year 2000 in this country. It's true of a lot of old-time musicians. I don't know if I would even call them old-time musicians. They're traditional. Their materials derived from many traditions, mostly Appalachian string bands, but Jody's well-versed in Indian music, Caribbean music, acoustic blues, honky-tonk, all kinds of stuff. They're a pair that were fortunate that they found one another musically when they did, because again, I think what the things they've done together are way more fulfilling than anything either one of them had done before that. James King, another one of Ken's discoveries in a sense, although people in the Southeast knew about him as a great lead singer in the old style, vis-a-vis the Stanley Brothers, etc. Ken sort of made it the larger bluegrass world aware of him, to his great credit.
Where can you find him? Just playing festivals, or?
I'm not sure where Ken found him. James had a rather rocky, troubled past. He used to fill in as a lead singer for Ralph Stanley. I don't think he ever toured with him for any extended period, maybe a weekend or two at a time. I was known as a guy who could sing that standard repertoire, but he spent some time in jail. He won't talk about that. I'm not sure of the details, so I'm not gonna speculate. But he certainly didn't have a burgeoning career in bluegrass. I'm not sure he does now, but it's certainly more than he's ever had before. And he's one of the great singers in the old traditional style, Virginia, West Virginia, East Tennessee style. There aren't many of them left, and Ken again has brought him songs that he would never have recorded himself. It's funny because James recorded several songs that Bill and Delia recorded when they were on Rounder, and I think they're songs that Ken keeps pitching over and over.
Can you remember what some of them are?
The Wall by Whitey Schaefer, that's one. There's a lot of strange men, sell block tin, but the strangest of them all. Anyway, that one, and If Your Phone Don't Ring, That'll Be Me. It's a George Jones song. I'm not, and there are others as well, you know, and really you can detect the fine Italian hand of Ken Irwin in a lot of the repertoire.